Hi everyone, this is Striker, and welcome to episode number 4 of my Extreme-G strategy guide series. In this video, I will be covering each of the Meza Virs tracks from Extreme-G2, 3 extremely technical and claustrophobic tracks taking place within a dense jungle environment. I will start my analysis today by covering the Gleams track, the most complicated of the 3 locations. And while all 3 tracks share some geometric similarities and track layouts, their differences really establish the difficulty from the easiest track, Wind Farm, to the hardest one, Gleams. Now, as we start the track on Gleams, and with each of these 3 track runs, you want to be turbo boosting as you cross the starting line. That will allow us to maintain the most amount of speed coming into the start of the lap, saving us time. I also recommend that you stay as far to the left-hand side of the starting grid as possible, as we are about to make a very sharp right-hand turn exiting this initial tunnel. Now, when it comes to Meza Virs, the most important concept is the tilt of your stick. In Extreme-G2, we can tilt down to keep our bike lower on the track after jumps and to maintain more ground contact, which inevitably leads to more speed. If we want to make sharper turns or gain more airtime, we can either let off of the stick on jumps or actually pull back on the control stick as we make a lateral movement. That will allow the sharpest possible turns, which we will need right here in this first section. Notice how I get onto this left barrier and then I get off of this left barrier before I exit this final section. If you scrape this wall here, you will slow down and lose time. Now the next section is a loop. And yes, I have tried to slow down and jump through this section. While it is possible, the speed that you lose upon landing makes it prohibitive versus actually taking the loop as intended. Notice I keep my bike in the straightest possible orientation, and upon landing, I once again assume a backwards left tilt of the control stick to make the sharpest possible turn. Now this is the only section of Meza Virs in which I will initiate a vehicle drift. So watch my craft here. Look at that sharp cut that I'm making. That is because I do not want to scrape this right-hand barrier, as in my testing I have found that loses you a significant amount of time. As I come over this hill now, notice the air time that I achieve right here. That minute amount of displacement between my vehicle wheels and the track surface will allow me to land with significantly more speed, and you can see that by my down tilt of the craft. So that is one of the many examples of how stick tilt is so critical in this track. Now, if I did that properly and maintained speed, I will, by letting up on the control stick, initiate a significant jump off of this upward hill. Watch how high my vehicle goes here. From here, look at my speedometer, 446 miles per hour. Watch as I now hit a down tilt. All of a sudden, I'm rocketing to 600 and upcoming basically 700 miles per hour with a supersonic drift engaged. That means that I am maximizing this next straightaway. However, coming over this hill, there was a slight issue where my vehicle got thrown a bit to the left. and in an attempt to overcorrect, watch how I slightly shifted right and barely scraped upon this barrier. Now luckily, the upcoming section is a very subtle blind hill right here, followed by a very sharp right-hand turn. So it actually behooves me to not go into it with such a fast velocity. So that little wall scrape was otherwise to be preceded by a hit of the brake in most situations to make this turn safely. Regardless, as I come over the turn, I pitch down because I want to keep my vehicle on the ground. I also start to visualize this right-hand grass barrier. As I come through here, any scrape of this geometry where you could see the actual seams will lose you time. So you want to avoid that, but then pull back on the stick sharp enough to avoid this left barrier as well. Now, if we back it up for just a second, there is an alternate route, and in weapon-enabled combat in racing situations, it may be a safer option to go around the long way since it's an easier turn. As we know from playing EXTREME-G2, the physics can be very fickle. So minimizing the oscillation of the craft in sharp sequences could help consistency. But we're going for maximal speed here, so we once again avoid that right barrier. Ensure that we're going about 700 miles per hour down this straightaway, and avoid that jump on the left, as that will only lead to more airtime and less speed gain. Unlike the other games that you're familiar with me playing, like Redout, we don't gain speed in the air, so we want to make sure the vehicle is pretty much pinned down to the ground at all times. Now, at this section, I have to be very careful of my speed meter because after I get thrown over this hill, there is an upcoming left-hand turn. And if you do not hit the brake, in my testing, if you're going fast enough up this straightaway, you will fly over it. The vehicle will land without enough time to make this left-hand turn, and you'll crash into the barrier, immediately ruining your lap. If I can maintain enough speed coming around this right-hand turn now, what I want to do is disable all steering. So I release my finger off the stick and I let the vehicle fly off the hill, drop straight down, jump off this hill, straight down, and then assume control of the stick. My one true flaw in this lap is that due to some weirdness with the way my vehicle took this particular turn, watch my back wheel. The back wheel actually lets up right there. So that's unusual. I've never had that happen before where I actually lose my back wheel's contact. So as I landed, the vehicle, you could see, shifted a little bit to the right, and that lost me a bit of speed. My second landing wasn't bad, however, and I can tell by how quickly I get over to this dirt. Now you might say, that seems simple enough. Why did I say initially that this track is so technical? Well, watch this back half of the track. I pitch down through this hill. I have a sharp right, another sharp right with very low visibility. Remember, this is the N64 era, so not only are we dealing with physical obstruction due to the trees that are in the background of the jungle, but there is a fog layer, which appears more black, that prevents me from really seeing what I'm doing. With muscle memory and time, I can get over some of those limitations, but you still have to be very alert and reactive to the upcoming situation, especially because you're not always taking every turn exactly the same in a game as volatile as EXTREME-G2. So we have our left-hand turn, another really sharp turn. I hold slightly off, but as I make this next left-hand turn, I am down pitching, and you can see that there are some geometry seams. They could tend to buck the bike up in the air, lose you speed. Actually, you saw it happen right here. So see that slight elevation, but I was holding down on the stick, and then I was holding down here, so I was able to land. Once I come over the second hill now on this double left-hand sequence right here, I lay off of the stick to ensure the consistency that I obtain supersonic speeds, and you can see that by these little indicators on the HUD. And in real time, it's a little bit more evident. You can see those wing-like effects on the HUD. If I get over 700 miles per hour coming down this straight, this gives me a half second of reprieve before the most difficult section of the track in terms of turning, which is a very sharp right, pulling back on the stick. Then immediately followed by a left-hand turn that in almost every situation bucks the craft up into the air. You can see my back wheel here. But I did a remarkable job, or I should say, I got remarkably lucky in that when the craft gets thrown from this hill, I was still able to maintain a high speed and avoid the right-hand barrier here. Now from here, watch what happens upcoming. That occurs very, very quickly coming off of a previous left-hand turn. Now you might say, didn't you scrape the sidewall here, as we talked about before with the grass seams? Well, unusually, this did not slow me down one bit. As a matter of fact, if I'm going at this speed in this particular sharp turn and my craft is coming more here, which would ordinarily be the line of thought for a turn like this, it's very, very likely that my vehicle would fly up in the air again and hit where my mouse is here on the left barrier. So I found you stay really close to the right, and watch how even though I get thrown, I quickly land again, and I'm pulling hard, still at 660 miles per hour. Let me just play this one more time in real time so you can understand the reactions necessary. So watch how I come across into the double right. Look how quickly this occurs. So you have to be very, very mindful in real time that the vehicle is staying on the ground and also where you are positioning yourself on the particular track. Now from here, this section is unusual. So you see this barrier here? This is indicative of one of the other track layouts, which we'll go over in a minute. The idea that Gleams is the hardest track comes about by the addition of this double right, double left, sharp section versus the other two tracks that don't contain this segment at all. So in regular schools of thought, you would start with the easiest track and move up to the hardest. But I've actually found that working backwards gives me some more insight into the inner workings of the track itself, provided I'm willing to put the time into time trialing. Now, as I come over here, there is a very, very small window of opportunity where it's inevitable that I get thrown up into the air, but that I can land, avoid the right barrier. So watch how as I came over that hill, I made that very sharp left-hand lean of the bike. I catch the wheels and I'm driving straight, still at over 500. You wouldn't visualize it by the success I had in this section now, but this will ruin 80% of the laps that ordinarily would be good up until this point. You see how fast that all occurs. And there's a little bit of a wobble that I initiated too in the vehicle. That is just a minor change of angle. So watch 1, 2, 3. See that angle change? That allows me to cut the wheels, land appropriately. Once I do so, and I am sure that my bike is not going to steer one direction or another without my inputs, now I hit my nitro boost for this lap. And I enjoy this all the way into the final straightaway and jump. Now this jump is very tricky. First of all, it's not even. Secondly, it has a nasty tendency to throw the bike one way or the other in terms of lateral angle. As I'm landing here, I'm noticing that my bike is en route to crash into this barrier and completely destroy this lap. However, see how the bike is tilted left. So I took a huge gamble here in landing and not touching the stick initially. So right there. And I guessed correctly because as soon as my bike wheels landed, without any left-hand steering input, the bike shot left. From here, I made a very slight turn back to center to get my bike from hitting the left wall and coasted right through the finish line for a dramatic world record. Now, how do the other two tracks differ? Well, let's take a look at the Harvest track. Now, I don't particularly like the layout of Harvest, so I did the bare minimum of giving myself a world record without putting in too much effort. But the main differences are in that ending section not having to encounter so many dramatic turns. The only thing that makes it a little tricky is that you have to hit your nitro boost earlier in those final turns that it does contain in order to maintain the fastest possible speeds. Let's take a look. Now, working backwards from there, we get to the wind farm track, which is the easiest of the three. But in a show for how unique the branching paths concept was by the developers in creating these three tracks, watch how vastly different Wind Farm plays. This track, unlike the claustrophobic Gleams and Harvest variations, gives us one of the fastest and most dynamic speed zones in the entire game. Take a look at this. Alright, so that about covers it for the Meza Virs location. It's been a lot of fun getting back into Extreme-G and overcoming tracks that initially seemed extremely arduous in my playthroughs of the XG campaign. I'm looking forward to eventually diving back into some of the game's other locations and, of course, bringing you some new strategic content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you all next time.